Scott, it is absolutely wonderful to have you here. How are you today?
Wonderful to be with you as well. Very excited to chat with you.
Fantastic. So I don't know what to describe you as. Do I call you an inventor, an astronaut, an adventurer, a CEO, is there a physician? Is there one word that you respond to, one title?
Well, I'm not big on titles, but I guess I would describe myself as someone who really savors the joy of life. Life is truly a gift, and to not miss out on anything is kind of uh, my credo. I think we're all on this earth for a finite period of time, and it's incumbent upon us to make the most of each and every day.
I think you have done that and are doing that, so I will love that. So most children want to be astronauts. Is that something that you had in mind as a child, or did it happen because it evolved for you?
It was something that was almost innate with me. I was very fortunate, I have to say, because my father worked on the Apollo program when I was very young. So I had a front row seat to these amazing times when we were sending astronauts to the moon in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I had model rockets and posters on the wall, and the opportunity to really to dive deep into what would it be like to one day fly in space. And in fact, even at age 5, there's some really cool photos of me holding a little toy rocket. But at that age, I dreamt of becoming the Neil Armstrong equivalent of setting the first boot prints on Mars. And
Wow.
although my career didn't exactly go in that trajectory, I was very fortunate to fly on 5 space shuttle missions and do some other really wonderful expeditions. And of course, now we're in this new era of space exploration, and we really are, I think, on a trajectory to send humans to Mars in the next 10 years or so, which is exhilarating.
Fantastic. I mean, for someone who doesn't know very much about being an astronaut, what's the selection process like? What's the criteria? What do you need to be able to do, and what your characteristics to be an astronaut?
I recall interviewing for the job, and they had whittled down from several thousand people down to about 120 for final interviews, and they brought 20 of us at a time to Houston for medical examinations and interviews and things of that nature. And I remember looking around this group thinking any one of these 20 people would make wonderful astronauts. And in fact, there's so many highly qualified people for the job. I think what it really came down to by the selection committee, and kind of what I looked for in later years as I helped select future classes, is just a sense of being a constructive team member. It's fine, in fact, necessary to be a strong individual performer, but if you can't be part of a high functioning multidisciplinary team, you're probably not someone that would make a great crew member. And I think that translates very well to the corporate world. It's great to have a very powerful individual skill set, but if you can't interface with your colleagues, if you can't collaborate, if you can't be part of the greater mission, you're probably not meant to be part of this team. So to summarize, I guess I would say that it's having the ability to be a contributing member of a team, to be willing to do things that may not be in your job responsibility, but you pick up and help out whenever and wherever needed.
There's an awful lot about attitude and personality, isn't it, as opposed to perhaps any specific education maybe, but that relates really well to business, the team and the flexibility of mindset. And you're trusting other people with your life, aren't you? So you have to trust quite quickly.
That's right. It's an imperative that your teammates not only know your skill set, but believe that you will be there for them, when the challenging times come, and inevitably they do. Challenging endeavors, whether it's going into space, climbing a big mountain, or starting a new business venture, they're going to be potholes along the roadway, and you need to be able to adapt to those readily. And certainly in the case of spaceflight, you're not only always going to be performing at your very best. We have this thing called space motion sickness that affects many astronauts early in flight. And so I've been on a couple of flights where, 2 of 6 crew members are really unable to perform because they're feeling ill, and so everybody else has to pick up and do the jobs that they would have been doing otherwise. So you need to be able to support one another.
That sounds a little less glamorous than I'm imagining it now, to feel sick and to feel ill, but I can appreciate that must be awful. So you mentioned at the beginning that you were interested in space from the age of 5. But you must have had, when you finally got out into space, there must have been some surprises for you, some things that you weren't expecting. What were your first impressions, and what did you find that you weren't expecting to find?
I felt I was as well prepared as a rookie astronaut as I could have possibly been. I'd done, hundreds of hours of simulations. I talked to all of my colleagues who had been there before. I'd been in centrifuges, jet aircraft flights, parabolic flight, in weightless environments, in a training pool. I thought, I know what this is going to be like. I'd seen all the IMAX movies. There was nothing that I could have done to really prepare myself mentally, emotionally, maybe even spiritually. It was such an overwhelming sense of awe that you have, having that global perspective, from hundreds of miles above the planet, traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, seeing the Earth as a confluence of humanity and nature, instead of a globe on a post that spins and dots on the globe that depicts cities, but just the enormity of it, the scale, the beauty, the sense of awe that shook me to my soul. And I think everyone that has the opportunity to fly in space comes back profoundly changed.
Oh, that's wonderful. It must be incredible to see your planet from above it. It must be a phenomenal experience. I can understand how you would be moved. So tell me, in the introduction, I mentioned that there was an Apollo 13 moment for you in an EVA, which I believe is an extravehicular activity. So it's basically when you're outside, you're actually in space. Can you tell us what happened? I'd love to hear that story.
Yes. So first off, talking about extravehicular activity or spacewalking, which is a bit of a misnomer. We on orbit on the International Space Station or on Hubble, we're actually space crawling. We're using hand over hand to get to wherever we want to go. But space crawling doesn't sound nearly as cool as spacewalking, so that's how it gets its name. But on my 5th and final mission to the International Space Station, we had a solar panel that had become torn as a result of actually orbital debris. A piece of cosmic junk had clipped a small wire in a solar panel, and as this solar panel was being commanded to extend, it began to rip apart. And in that condition, it was really, really unsafe for the space shuttle to even undock. The concern was that if we were to undock the space shuttle, the entire solar panel could rip apart and hit the space station or the space shuttle, causing considerable damage, maybe making it unsafe for us to even come home. So we had to think very quickly whether to figure out a way to repair the solar panel, or we'd have to go out on a spacewalk and throw away $1 billion national asset. And so brilliant engineers in mission control, Houston and elsewhere around the country, over the course of 3 days, came up with this brilliant plan using a cobbled together robotic arm and a spacewalker out at the very tip of this thing to go essentially sew the solar panel back together. And what was a little bit harrowing is that you couldn't really turn off the solar panel. Even in orbital night, when the space station is in shadow, it's still generating lots and lots of electricity. So we had to develop procedures that would keep the spacewalker, myself, safe to prevent any electricity coming into my spacesuit, causing a fire or an explosion. So, Houston was able to do that. The crew and I were able to go conduct this spacewalk, and very proud to say that this repair is now aboard the International Space Station. It will serve it till it's deorbited, perhaps 10 years or more in the future. So it was really one of those Apollo 13 sorts of efforts where you can't go to the local hardware store and get a solar array repair kit. You have to build it with the things that you have around you. And that's what I like to, reflect on is when times get really challenging, what tools do you have? What ideas, what people can you bring in to solve the inevitable challenges that we all face, whether it's in our business lives and our professional lives. You have to be resilient and resourceful.
Such a good parallel to business, to be able to find what have you already got without having to try and find something else, without spending on other resources, but what have you got internally? Who are the people who can help you? What are the things that you can do? That's incredible. It sounds terrifying, that story, absolutely terrifying. And I'm really disappointed to hear that you were talking about cosmic junk. How big a problem is cosmic junk? Do you know?
It's an extraordinary problem right now, and it's only going to get worse. Within the next few years, we're going to have 120,000 new launches of satellites, microsatellites, picosatellites. Every launch that goes up generates debris, whether it's the fairings of the rockets or just flecks of paint that have come off it, and they're traveling at tens of thousands of miles an hour, traveling in these different intersecting orbits. If you happen to have an expensive satellite there, or if you happen to be an astronaut in a spacewalking suit out in the environs of this, these things will just slice right through whatever they come in contact with. So this is a huge problem. Our entire industrial base, our entire society really is so dependent upon these assets in space, more and more so. The ubiquity of our access to the web, information, commerce depend on satellite communications, and as we get more and more crowded there, traffic control, if you will, is going to be a real problem.
Wow, it seems that everywhere we go, whatever we do, we seem to pollute everything, don't we, with our mess, with our debris. Let's not focus on that. But what would you like the space program to achieve in the future, in the next 10 years and beyond? What are you hoping to come?
I'm so sorry for the beeps on my computer here, but so these are really extraordinary times that we live in. When we think about Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin in the last couple of months now, launching the first tourist astronauts into suborbital space, with SpaceX repeatedly delivering people and payloads to the International Space Station, testing rockets that will one day go to the moon and onto Mars. We are really in a new renaissance of space exploration. So I see a whole new generation of young people, engineers, scientists, medical specialists, whole economies moving to the moon and ultimately to colonize Mars. And so what I hope is that we'll benefit from our lessons learned here on Earth. We'll benefit from the brilliant minds that will create these environments, and we'll be better stewards of the moon and better stewards of what I call Earth 2.0. But when we do colonize Mars, I hope that we take our best practices and are better stewards of these other environments that we'll go inhabit. But we really are at a time when humanity is going to set foot and actually colonize other worlds.
Wow, we're going to become Martians. That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how far ahead do you think that is? Is it in my lifetime? I won't tell you how old I am.
Well, we're probably about the same, but I believe that we'll be on the moon to stay, akin to what we have at the South Pole Station. It's a remote outpost that needs resupply, but we'll be there within the next 5 or 6 years. NASA has on its books that we'll return to the moon by 2024. I don't quite believe them, but I do think that shortly thereafter, 5 to 6 years from now, we'll be sending crews repeatedly to the moon, ultimately to create a habitat on the south pole of our closest celestial neighbor, and be able to extract water ice that will allow us to generate oxygen, to breathe, to grow hydroponic crops there in that environment, and sustain life, and use that as a launching pad then to take us ultimately to Mars, which is something that I know Elon Musk has a desire to do. In fact, he stated that he wants to die on Mars, which I think is a real commitment.
Wow.
So,
Goodness gracious. Okay, I don't want to die on Mars.
yeah.
I'm not, I don't want to die on the planet here, but hey. That's fascinating about you is that you're a bit of an inventor, and you've invented several I don't know very much about them actually, but it's about performance, is it? Is those kind of things?
I have a number of patents, and more importantly, I'm working to commercialize all of them. So the hardest part I found in innovation is not the brilliant idea of creating an invention, but it's the pathway to actually get it into the hands of customers and to have it change the lives of other people. And so that's, as an entrepreneur, that's what I'm actively involved with. But I have a company called Fluidity Technologies that's involved in human-machine interfaces for everything that moves in 3 dimensions, whether it's a drone, an electric vertical takeoff and land, aircraft like a flying car, to things further afield like surgical robotics, to be able to precisely and intuitively move an asset almost as a subconscious act. So that's one area of my innovation. I have other medical devices that I've worked on, and even consumer types of products that I've developed. And what I like to talk about in terms of corporate audiences in particular is creating an environment that's really conducive to innovation, and that rewards and celebrates innovation, and developing a framework where you can be very successful in doing this. One of my more interesting jobs before I became a tech CEO was actually as a chief technology officer at a medical institution. And what we did is we created these multidisciplinary teams that brought together people that were rarely asked, what's your opinion? How can we make things better for our patients? So I brought together the nurses, and I brought together the respiratory technicians and the janitorial staff, as well as the physicians and other people that were in the patient care flow, but brought everyone together in a room. What's working well for you? What's a hassle? What's costing too much money? What's causing the most pain for your patients? Where can we make life better for our patients overall? And what we found is oftentimes the best ideas came from the people that were never asked their opinion, but the nurse who with duct tape and a piece of chewing gum came up with some cobbled together gizmo that actually saved a lot of time, reduced pain, what have you. And so I've reproduced this sort of framework in the later stages of my life, pulling together multidisciplinary teams to solve difficult problems.
And I mean, that's a wonderful example. And again, it's an example that relates so brilliantly to business, because often sort of the innovation or the creativity it's in a department, isn't it, tucked away, as opposed to having everybody being responsible and involved. And I can see that those examples are brilliant. And of course, the example that you had with your EVA of people, all coming together to try and solve a big problem. I think people tend to be more innovative when they're pushed in the corner and they have to solve it. It's how do you get into that mindset that you should always be innovative? Can you get into that mindset and that way of being?
Absolutely. And in fact, as I often tell corporate events, we have both an opportunity and an obligation to innovate. We're in this environment, myself in healthcare. If we didn't always ask the question, how can we do things better, we'd still be, doing bloodletting for everything that ailed us, just be in a very primitive state of affairs. And so we have to continue to, always ask the question, how can we do this better, faster, cheaper, whatever the parameters of a business unit happen to be. I feel very fortunate in that I've been thrust into extreme environments, which I find to be extraordinary catalysts for innovation. When you send an astronaut into space, a climber to, the top of a mountain, a diver deep in the ocean, these are places where humans really weren't meant to be naturally, but you can send them there if you think very carefully, how can we do this safely? What can we do to enhance human performance, extract more science and engineering data? When you answer those types of questions, inevitably you come back with wonderful technologies that benefit us here at sea level. When I walk into an emergency department or an operating room, I see technologies that have their pedigree in the space program. When you walk into a military unit, the protective gear and so on that they use also has its pedigree in the space program and vice versa. We're trying to protect human life, but then we can use those things in other facets of our society.
Okay, so you talked about extreme environments and you talked about where people are not meant to be. You have a tendency to want to go where people are not meant to be. Tell me about this descent into a volcano. I mean, seriously, why would you want to descend into a volcano, Scott?
Well, other than it's an extraordinary place, there are anywhere between 7 and 10 lava lakes on planet Earth at any one time. They're very rare. I was very fortunate to be asked to join an expedition sponsored by GE a few years ago to Masaya Volcano, the youngest lava lake on the planet. And it's an extraordinary place. It takes a lot of technology to get anywhere near it, although it's only a 10-minute drive from the capital city of Managua, where 2 million people live. So what is the driver first off? Well, there are 800 million people around the world that live in close proximity to volcanoes. And they have no idea whether the volcano that's in their backyard is going to erupt. And so what we wanted to do is very carefully, as best we could, implant a sensor array in and around the volcano such that we could extract a lot of data and then use big data analytics to establish a predictive model of eruptive activity. So if we knew that if there was a certain blip in a certain data set, immediately prior to an eruption, we could then, let the residents of Managua know that it's time to evacuate. Something big is about to happen. So what we did is we set up a really novel, essentially a zip line, but it was a steel braid cable from the crater rim down to the crater floor. There's about 1,200 meters of descent. And then repeatedly sent teams and equipment down to stage, first at what we called level 1, and then ultimately myself and the expedition leader, Sam Kosman, made the first descent, first boot prints down to the bottom of this crater. And it was one of the most extraordinary things that I've ever seen. I stood essentially 30 feet away from molten rock. It was waves crashing on a beach of black lava, and I can't even imagine a brighter light. It was like looking into the sun, but of course it was looking into essentially the center of our Earth, the magma just frothing and steaming with lava bombs going up and over the horizon. But we were in a relatively safe spot to then, take some measurements and thankfully get out of there before anything happened to us.
I think you must have a very brave insurance company with what you do, Scott, because some of the things I can imagine you filling out the form. So, yeah, oh yes, that's what I'm going to do in the volcano and space,
That
and
one's
it's
never
like,
come up. They don't ask those questions, thankfully. So
let's hope no one's listening that could tell them and tip them off. So we talked about the great lessons that you can, with all of the stories that you have that you can illustrate and all the experiences. So we talked about a little bit about teamwork. You talked about innovation. I can imagine that there are other topics that work well. I imagine risk management,
yeah.
leadership. Yeah. So
Uh, yes. So leadership under adversity, situationally appropriate leadership is what we would kind of describe our operations aboard the space shuttle as an example. There are, assigned roles and responsibilities. There's the ship's commander, whose ultimate responsibility is the safe completion of the mission. There's the flight director and mission control, who's the ultimate authority. But it may be the rookie astronaut who is not jaded is a strong word, but indoctrinated to the system, who makes an observation that's just brilliant, that saves the day. And so, creating an environment where if someone has the situational awareness, the insight, taking the time to listen to everyone, and most decisions don't need to be made as a snap decision. There's time. So when you can take the time to listen, to discuss, oftentimes you end up with by far the best results. So using different styles of leadership, especially when facing adversity, is something that I love to talk about. And then risk management as well is certainly a topic that's near and dear to myself. As an astronaut, as a physician, as an explorer, I'm not a risk taker or a daredevil, as you might imagine, just by listing the places that I've been, but I'm actually very carefully analyzing the environment, training relentlessly, understanding the risks that are out there, and then mitigating those risks before I ever set foot into the environment. So there are many things that you can do, whether it's heading for the summit of Mount Everest, as I've done. Yes, it's a dangerous environment, but if you are physically, mentally, technically trained, you know that the weather forecast for the next 5 days is going to be excellent. Your teammates are in great shape. You're well rested. You're well fed. You're well hydrated. The route's in good shape. You can make that sortie and head towards the summit with a reasonable degree of safety. If you let any of your guard down, however, things can turn badly very quickly, and I've seen that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So all of those great topics with your wonderful stories, illustrations, and images, I think it's certainly a content that clients will never forget. What's next for you, Scott? What's the next big challenge?
Well, I believe I'm living, the dream, the American dream here. I imagine it's the European dream as well, which is, to be an entrepreneur and innovator. And so I'm growing a couple of companies right now, which is very exciting, and it's in many ways a parallel to the challenges of scaling a mountain or heading off into space. And so I'm working really diligently, relentlessly towards growing my company, and so that's an all-consuming task. And it's interesting. People ask me all the time, "What's the toughest thing you've ever done? That epic spacewalk you did, or scaling Mount Everest after rupturing a disc in your back on the mountain the year before?" I didn't summit the first time I went to Everest. And I tell them, neither. The toughest thing I've ever done is starting a company. And it really is a wonderful journey. The fact that you need to, just like preparing for space flight, have to wear so many different hats, and you have to overcome so many hurdles. But if you're tenacious, if you build the right team, if you stay true to your mission, you can achieve great success. So that's what I'm involved in, professionally right now. There are other things that, as an explorer, I continue to do. I recently returned from the wreck of the RMS Titanic, actually. I took a submersible dive It's about 12,600 feet below the ocean surface, just off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. And so I'm a submersible pilot in training. And so I've been enjoying some explorations closer to home more recently.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. And is there a final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with regards to leadership, team building, risk management, or innovation? Any of those that you'd like us to think about for the coming years that we should be focusing on?
I think these are extraordinary times to be alive. Obviously, there are many facets of the news and the media that can get us down. When we think about the pandemic that we've mostly gotten through, we're not done with it yet, unfortunately, at least in this country. Obviously, the news from Afghanistan is sobering, but I do think that we have this wonderful opportunity, given our abilities to communicate, to collaborate, to leverage the inventions, the technologies that we've already come up with. How can we work together to solve some of the greatest problems that we face? Climate change is a solvable problem. Ocean pollution is a solvable problem. Hunger, water security, all of these things can be solved by brilliant minds, and there are plenty of them. We just need to work together. And so I'm an optimist. I think that by working with the right teams and being resilient, we can do extraordinary things in the years ahead. So I would leave everyone with a very optimistic view of the future. And I would love to speak with your audiences in the future.
Fantastic. What a wonderful message to leave everybody on. Scott, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Absolutely. Wonderful to be with you.
Fantastic. Another frontier for you. You've now been on The Speaker Show too. So thank you everybody for listening to The Speaker Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. And you can keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com, or your favorite podcast app. And if you would like to invite Scott to speak at your next conference or event, please contact Speakers Associates in plenty of time to book him, because he might be somewhere strange doing some crazy adventure. You won't be disappointed. Thank you. See you next week.